So today on the podcast, I have CyberToothKat. CyberToothKat was introduced to me via charged particles. If you remember a few episodes back, I had Ben and Sam on. Wouldn't be a terrible idea to couple that episode with this one, because here I am building on this notion of nested NFTs and an exploration again of what's possible. So if the gaming aspect of what we're discussing today isn't your thing, then I am challenging you to take a step back, because the gaming aspect of it is just a small part of what we're actually discussing. And gaming may in fact be where a lot of things that are ultimately ported over into other applications across. And if you really want to understand what's going to happen across a Web3 environment, might be a great idea to look at how gaming and the metaverse interact. Also, there's a component here where we're talking about portability of assets across the metaverse and not just simply the metaverse environments themselves, which is an important thing to think about when you're talking about Web3. So now, what am I talking about with Web3? Well, Web3, a couple of core characteristics, which we've talked about before: decentralized servers instead of like a Google, and users bringing their identities and different attributes associated with their identities. They could be digital assets, they could be digital data, but porting them, bringing them to each of these decentralized servers. They may not elect to, they may use Web2 in certain cases, but they may elect to bring these aspects with them across the Web3 experience. And for the metaverse, I've used the term before, I think of it more as like immersive content and programs that allows those who have their or are porting their identities on Web3 to interact with it. That's my definition. Some people might take a different view, but I think fundamentally that's what we got. And I also want to challenge you when at the end of the episode, when CyberToothKat starts to talk about the Book of Alchemy and even things like how users would need to compile different elements for the purposes of forging a weapon, I really want you to listen to it for what it is, which is quite interesting. Again, this notion of nested NFTs. But I also want you to take a step back, and I want you to listen to it for what's possible and think outside the box, because I find that discussion interesting from so many different angles. And when he's describing about the creation of the story and the character development, think about the connection to the community that he is focusing on fostering. Listen to what happens at the Forge and after the Forge. Again, I'm really excited for this project. I'm really excited for what's possible. And also, I'm going to apologize for my mixing references to the metaverse. I use hyperverse, I use multiverse. I really just hate the fact that Facebook owns the term meta now. So with that, I bring you the episode with CyberToothKat. And again, if you like this podcast, share it. Please share it. I want to spread the word. I want people to benefit if you think it's beneficial. Again, thanks so much for being a supporter, and I will bring you the episode now. Welcome to The Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all manner of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading, with a focus on new and developing technologies. So today on The Encrypted Economy, we have CyberToothKat joining us on the podcast. Welcome, CyberToothKat.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about, not so much what is commonly known as the metaverse, which we'll cover on a definitional perspective, but talking about the ability of bringing digital asset across systems, NFTs, characters, different accessories for those characters. And at the head of the charge here, we have CyberToothKat to help fill out this topic. So CyberToothKat, let's start with the origin story.
Oh, so I've worked in games, sort of traditional games, not metaverse games, but AAA-ish level games since about 2011, 2012, as a character creator and a creative director, and then also as a producer. So games have kind of been the hub of my life for more than a decade. And I discovered crypto and NFTs actually just right about 1 year ago, almost to the day, really, or maybe we're a week off. So I'm newer to the NFT space, but of course not to the concept of the metaverse, which is not fundamental to the NFT space. So what I began to do last year was because I'm a prolific artist as well as a game professional, I began to make NFTs and to build community and did a really fun big drop in September That was on a platform called copperlaunch.com, and there were 40 NFTs, and it was like a Dutch auction style liquidity balancer pool drop, and it did extraordinarily well. People like the art, they love the Dutch auction style, and that kind of launched me full time into NFTs. And of course, with my gaming background and having some success with NFTs and seeing that there was a bit of a dearth, honestly, in good crypto metaverse positioned gaming, I said, hey, we're going to make a game. And so I've been gearing up for that since about October, and going to start sort of really honest full-scale development, most likely around the end of February. We've got some early stuff going on, but we're really going to hit the ground running in just about a month or so.
Excellent. You talked a little bit about how you view the NFT space today, and it's a broad space. I mean, but how do you view like NFT content today in relation, like the state of the space in relation to what you do from like a gaming or a gaming asset perspective?
So I don't want to share too many of my opinions, I guess I'll say, about the broader NFT space. It's a real mixed bag. You've got all these different spectrums of people. Most of it, honestly, is like prospecting. It's sort of like any other collectible rush where people really see some value there. They can flip the JPEGs, as we say, flipping Peggies. And you can come in and buy it new and low, and what do you know, 6 months later, you're a millionaire or whatever it may be. And most of that's hyperbole and hype. It's not really happening, for the vast majority of people. But some of those early adopters, CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, et cetera, have really done well. That has permeated the whole space with this idea that you can kind of come in, be smart at flipping, and just have your portfolio explode. I don't think that's much of the reality. And again, without sharing too many of my opinions, we probably have a big bubble here that's in danger with, without going too much further, of probably bursting on a lot of people. So, but you also have these art collectors in this space. You have people that are really here because they love this idea of a non-fungible token. That's what they really love about it. They love blockchain technology, and they see an intersection between creative people and that technology as a way to bypass a lot of the gatekeepers and actually have, real value in the art, real value in the creator. If you're a musician, you probably love this, right? Because maybe you don't have to sign with a big label and be a slave for 10 years and give all your sweat, blood, and tears, and the label does really well and you do mediocre. Maybe you can actually interface directly with your audience through the blockchain technology and really keep that value for yourself and for the people that are buying your art. So there's this whole spectrum there with NFTs. And honestly, I'm not sure really where we're going to land. It's a mixed bag right now. It's probably going to stay a mixed bag for quite a while. But in relation to what I want to do in the space, and specifically to gaming, I felt that the technology is young and the audience is emergent. The technology is emergent and the audience is emergent, in that we don't really know what beautiful things serendipitously or otherwise might explode forth in this space. Plus, we've got this concept of the metaverse, which everyone agrees is coming, but we don't really know what it's going to be. And we don't really know what apparatus and what formats will really usher it in the vision. We have Ready Player One, as a movie that kind of shows us a vision of what might be. And we have some things out there that are really kind of early, really quite broken, I think, versions of that. But I believe that NFTs and blockchains will lead the way into the metaverse, whatever that's looking like. So what I want to do with the NFT community and with blockchain technology is be on the curve of that as it develops, and to be making games and to be positioned toward the future so that as it's developing, me, my NFTs, my company, the game that I'm creating will be agile enough to be at the forefront of that and capture the best, hopefully, of everything that's happening to make something really new and unique.
And when we talk about NFTs in the context of gaming, in many cases, when you're buying an NFT, you're buying a link. In other cases, there are some elements built into the hash function that allow you to sort of reproduce your unique asset. How do you view that evolution impacting gaming and putting things on the metaverse?
Well, you touched on something really important. But as you said, sometimes when you get an NFT, you're kind of really getting an NFT. Sometimes when you're getting an NFT, you're not. You're getting a thing that's positioned as an NFT. You're getting a thing that sort of functions like an NFT, but it's on some private server somewhere. And if someone turns off that server, what happens to your permanent blockchain, non-fungible entity? It's gone. That's not what we were promised, right? That's not why I get an NFT. So the technology itself, you have to kind of know what you're doing, because a true non-fungible token is not, behind some centralized server somewhere that can be, manipulated, turned off, suspended, etc. You give me one moment. I'm going to eject this cat. I'm so sorry. He's going crazy. Go out, cat. So to get back,
although ironic that CyberToothKat is having an issue with his cat this morning, but continue.
I told him, like,
with the cat's teeth, no less. So
yeah, don't misbehave. But he's not really on my team. So there's things to really consider, because the main thing we're doing with an NFT is we want it to last forever. If we buy it, we want it to be ours forever. If that's what we want, that's what we promised with the blockchain, right? Like this permanent, immutable record of a non-fungible token, an ERC or whatever it may be, depending on what chain you're sort of getting it on, that's there forever and is noted on the chain as ours, or unless we sell it or something. But then we're still in that block, right? That's the real allure of the game. To get to your true question here, is to have this immutable force that is out there, that's on blockchain, as opposed to more traditional gaming where it's very much the man behind the curtain. It's very much Wizard of Oz. It's very, and people are buying downloadable content and doing and investing so much time and money. And then the game developers, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not, make a big switch. You lose your content, you lose your community, all these things that have enraged people for so long, because it's very, very centralized. The beauty of blockchain should be that it's decentralized, of course, that you have a certain vested stake in ownership, that it is immutable, that it is non-fungible, it's unique. And with that in games, I just believe that we can do some truly innovative and incredible things, but we're not there yet. It's extremely emergent, and it will require people that really have the right values, that are truly embracing a decentralized vision, to partner up, come up with some great ideas, stay with the technology as it emerges, defend the things that are important about it, and get that stuff done. So I hope I'm answering your question, but what I'm really saying is we're so early that I'm not entirely sure where it will go, but I know where I want to be in that space, and I know how I want the Book of Alchemy to be positioned in that space, and that's the whole reason why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, Vitaly Buterin was inspired by that very issue with World of Warcraft, when they changed some function. I guess I'm not a World of Warcraft buff at all, but they changed something in it that caused him to lose out, and there was nothing he could do about it. And that was largely an inspiration for him moving toward a decentralized system. So
yeah, it was definitely his defining moment. And we won't talk too much about World of Warcraft. And thank God, for Blizzard and for that game. That game's just been cherished by millions and millions of people. But if you look at the company itself right now, serious problems across the whole company. And as you said, these are the things that are pushing people into DeFi, crypto, blockchain, because we just don't want to have to deal with that stuff forever. The technology is here, and we want to embrace it properly.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about some of the early metaverse type environments like Second Life. Now, Second Life doesn't have this notion of portability from outside Second Life, but I think many would define it, and correct me if I'm wrong, as probably one of the most earliest examples of a metaverse, or certainly one of the earliest examples of a fairly successful and sustaining metaverse. Maybe let's talk a little bit about Second Life and what the metaverse promises that Second Life does not.
So I've looked into Second Life, and I know it sort of from a peripheral perspective, but just to lay it out there, it's not metaverse, it's metaversy. It's because it's really not a game as far as you go in and you level up and you achieve objectives, or things that we generally associate with games. It's very much like, if you've ever seen, there's a movie that came out, I think last year, called Free Guy. And their whole idea was to kind of build a metaverse where you could just kind of go in and chill. You could just sit in a lawn chair and sip an iced tea and just sort of watch the world live and breathe. The Second Life is a bit like that, in that it's really a place to kind of just go in and hang. There's not all these objectives and things. It's metaversy in that perspective, that it's sort of like a digital world where you can go in and get your avatar and things. Of course, it's got all these issues, right? Because it was real big, I think, around the end of the 2000s, and it's evolved a little bit. But, graphics are kind of crunchy, and it's just a little bit underdeveloped in these types of things. So that's a really nice case study for an entry point to the metaverse. But I think what we're being promised and what we're hoping for in the metaverse is something way more engaging and compelling, that you could choose Do I just want to sip iced tea in this lawn chair and watch dinosaurs graze on, beautiful grass? Or, do I want to go full alpha pup and, take the castle and fight knights? But I'm not going to be a knight, of course. I'm going to have a fully automatic, drop it from orbit nuke. I'm just going to go in and win. That you could sort of set that up. Again, kind of the Ready Player One scenario, if you've seen that film. For me, to the one last thing that I'll say, and I hope I haven't dodged your question at all because so many thoughts come to mind. We're wearing these giant things to go around in virtual reality, right? Oculus, all these different things. And I have friends that have worked in that industry and have made beautiful games for these VR or even AR devices. My personal opinion is that technology has to radically improve if we're going to feel immersed. I just watched an ABC, my Alexa Echo prompted me just yesterday. Oh, ABC just did this thing on the metaverse. And I watched it. And you've got this girl and she's about 95 pounds and the thing on her head, like she can barely even. But at the end of the show, of course, as this news correspondent, she was like, I felt so immersed. Everything felt real. I'm like, no, you didn't. You were struggling, from the very beginning of this thing. So we have so many technological things that really have to come in line. Now, one good innovator, I think could solve it. So my position is this stuff is about to get fixed. I just really believe it sooner rather than later. And maybe it won't be that now you have headgear that you really love. Maybe it'll be that it's more AR than VR or whatever it may be. But the beauty of the metaverse is that we're coming into a place right now where stuff like Second Life that had this vision but had all these inhibitors technologically, I think those inhibitors are going to go away really quick. And I think if we have a good vision, if we're not just sort of throwing, we'll talk about Book of Alchemy, if we're not just slinging mud against the wall to see what sticks, we could really make something, something beautiful and engaging and we'll talk about interoperability too, because that's important. But my whole spiel here has been that I think the technology has to do a quick quantum leap here before we really are talking about a metaverse, that we've been promised.
Right. And before we start to dial in a little bit more on some of the asset portability, we'll take a bigger picture view. Activision was recently acquired by Microsoft. Obviously, you've got Google. You've got Google working on it. You've got Facebook renaming itself Meta. There seems to be a rush to enter into this space. I've heard one person liken it to a war over batting practice.
So let's take Meta itself as a case study, right? This is Facebook. And a year or so ago, they kind of made separate logos for all their little, all of a sudden we had Instagram by Facebook. We had this product by Facebook, and they started to sort of create a through line or a thread for all those things. You could see they were gearing up for something. And what happened, of course, a couple of months ago is they rebranded their whole company to Meta, right? Clearly a notion to the metaverse and sort of a sense that Facebook is trying to tell us, oh, we really want to play with all you guys in the metaverse. You love Facebook so much that it just seems natural, of course, that we would become the hub to your metaverse. Well, every single person I know that understands the company of Facebook and that knows the real vision of the metaverse was like, that was a below the belt hit to the rest of us. We do not want a Facebook-like entity leading the way in the metaverse. That's the opposite of what we want in the metaverse. I'm not going to get into privacy and all these things. It's just this idea that Facebook, being an incredibly sort of centralized, privacy risk or even privacy averse entity, has come in and called themselves Meta as though they're going to lead the way, has everyone's hackles up and raised some really big red flags. Because I want to say again, the beauty of the metaverse will be a very decentralized, ungatekeepy scenario where we can interact with all kinds of creators and NFTs and environments and companies that want to play nice with everyone. Facebook calling themselves Meta is the opposite. It's going completely the wrong way. And I won't get into, Microsoft, heaven help us, and Activision and all these things, all these big mergers, and I won't talk about Star Wars, the kind of the love of my life since a child being bought by Disney and what it has become under this bizarre Disney-owned thing. It's always kind of the worst when we see all these separate entities that are really compelling being brought under the same envelope, because that's the opposite of what we've been promised through decentralization and DeFi and blockchain technology and stuff. So that for me is all a big red flag to answer your question. I don't see any of that going anywhere good. And the real rush in the metaverse right now is to be out in front of that. The hope that developers like myself and other small groups that really have come because we're passionate about the space and we're passionate about the technology and we're passionate about interacting with people and giving liberty and real blockchain decentralization. The rush now is to beat these guys. They really don't understand the audience that's already there. They just don't. They've got this vision to kind of come in and take it all under their wing because it's emergent. I think it's going to fail gloriously for most of them. In fact, for some of them, I think this is a last Hail Mary that's going to be because they don't know what they're doing. And the hope is, those of us that are in the space that see that train wreck coming can beat it, outdevelop it, position better on it, and bring a more true metaverse to pass. I hope that I addressed your question again, but that's kind of how I see the space unfolding right now, that it's a really critical time. And those of us that can get in there and develop, who have the real decentralized aspects in our mind, we've got to do it right now.
Right. I'm still holding out for maybe some influencers to come along and just change metaverse to like multiverse, just to completely F with Facebook. Yes. I think that would be phenomenal, given how much they put into that trademark. It would be just great. Like Meta, nobody uses Meta anymore. Why are you using Meta? That's so old school. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. I think what you've just said is a conversation we really need to have. That we need to flip some of these paradigms and labels right now, because I was in a blockchain gaming call just the other day, and when people started talking about the metaverse, they instantly had to pull back and be like, I'm not aligned with Facebook. We're not talking about Meta. It's already become a mess.
Yeah, now they're already owning the term. So really change it to multiverse. There's no reason why we have to use Meta at all. Anyway, so I don't know. Start the movement. Anyway, let's get excited about it. It's very easy. You still use the M. And they sure as hell, what are they going to do? Call themselves multi? Nobody can use multi anymore. We trademarked that name. Anyway, so we got deep into this. And so I'm going to actually kind of take a step back and sort of explain how I got connected to CyberToothKat. So I've been fascinated with a project called Charged Particles. And I did a podcast on it. And so I talked to Sam and Ben after, and I said, hey, can you introduce me to somebody who sort of incorporates what you're trying to do with charged particles? And this is how I got introduced to CyberToothKat. And so this is something that I kind of want to expand. So metaverse is obvious, or multiverse. The problem is if I start to go down the road of calling it multiverse and somebody comes and says, no, we're using hyperverse. And everybody's going to listen to this like, what is he talking about? Multiverse. It's like, so anyway, so I got to be careful. So multi-hyperverse, so I became fascinated with this notion of bring your own NFT model and the notion of sort of stacking NFTs together, which is really like, a lot of what I really want to start to delve into next. But let's just start off even with sort of the origin of your engagement with charged particles. What was the draw to you for charged particles?
So I was new to NFTs, had never been really prolific in, I don't want to say selling my art, had never been really prolific in building an audience for my art with traditional social media tools, because there's algorithms and just this huge hustle. And I just really love to create and not have to do all that stuff. So when I was introduced to NFTs, I began to fool around with, maybe I'll mint some NFTs, et cetera. And maybe some people want these, but the gas prices were real prohibitive to me, because for me to pay $70 or $80 to put something on blockchain, on the hope that someone might procure it for $200. And I'm, of course, using US dollars when that's kind of silly. It was just real inhibitive. So I said, you know what, I'm going to chill out and just kind of watch this space for a bit and see what the other innovators are doing, see what kind of art is going. And during that time, I was introduced to charged particles by a friend. A friend said, hey, man, watch this group because they're doing some interesting stuff. And so I began to lurk around their Discord, and I was in the Telegram chat and things like this. There was a lot of positive energy, and they made themselves really accessible. You mentioned Ben Lakoff. He makes himself really accessible, and he's basically kind of the CEO or the founder, co-founder, I think, of the DApp. Mango, the community manager, who's I believe now is the creative director, again, was someone who reached right out to me and said, hey, how can we make you comfortable in this space, et cetera. But what caused me to stay was the thing that you have mentioned. So I kind of found it on a referral, to answer your question directly. But as I poked around, it struck me as games. I said, this entity right here, this idea that you could take a top-level NFT and sort of stitch or merge other sub-level NFTs into it, and if a person obtains the top one, the whole thing goes with it, that's games. Because in my mind, that was, if I make a character and I stitch his weapon, his wolf, his armor, and his backstory underneath of it, now I'm not sort of offering one NFT as an artist or as a creative. I'm offering the building blocks of something interactive. I immediately began to talk to them about, what sort of gaming interest do you have? And they said, all the interest, by all means, please, make games with us. And it has evolved from there. But the real answer to your question was, because I get referred to all kinds of communities and I don't tend to stay more than a day or so. And it's usually I usually love the community. I just don't see that they're offering anything super innovative. But with Charged Particles, what I saw was something that was plug and play, where I don't have to hire a development team. I can make a game with gamified, real interactive capabilities on Charged Particles right now. And I've been, doing it to a certain degree with Book of Alchemy. We've done these little alpha case studies and they've done really well. But it was them being out in front of this idea that the blockchain should live and breathe a little bit. That you should be able to sort of slap something on it, take it back off, and it's still on block, but you've got these various elements of the chain that now can stitch together and sort of move around together. That really struck me as someone who is really forward thinking. And I believe they just launched they just announced a V2 this past week, and I'm super excited to see what that will be. With Charged Particles, you have a lot of the things that we've talked about already, and I'll speak for just a moment, then we can move on, in that the technology is really emergent and they've got this really great ideas, but they keep coming into all these unknowns that we're talking about. So they have to engineer, really agile development. They have to engineer these unique solutions right on the spot, not knowing that they would come into this problem. They have an idea. They say, well, the technology kind of does that. They begin to develop toward it and they go, oh, that's not working, right? So then they have to engineer these solutions. So version 1 of Charged Particles has been this beautiful, organic back and forth of, hey guys, the whole thing's broke today, versus that's really functioning well today, but I had to, Control R Shift full refresh and reload my wallet, and that works every time. But I need someone to tell me that I'll have to do that because the thing's just sitting there spinning. We're going to encounter a lot of that. But Charged Particles has been really agile. They've been really, all hands at the mast, and I think they've really got it now functioning way more smoothly. Version 2 should be, I think, really innovative.
Yeah, it's funny when I was talking with Ben and Sam, it's one of these technologies that you just have like all these, like you listen to it and you're like, but you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. And then, I think at one point Ben's like, yeah, that's a good idea. But it wasn't like, yeah, we should do it because, it's like, okay, but we have to do very basic stuff. We have to make sure it all works. Then we can do this. I mean, the scope of what they could do is limited only by your imagination with it. So how do you view, so you've talked a little bit about this coevolution in terms of like, the platforms and the destinations and the evolution of those spaces as compared to the evolution of assets and characters which are portable across those different destinations. How do you see them co-evolving?
So to answer real quick what my position on it is and where I want to be on it is, I believe that co-evolution might get a bit rocky, especially over the next 24 to 48 months, right? I think we're going to figure it all out. Who does that first and how it happens will greatly influence the level of real innovation we see at the space, right? Because if Metaverse or Meta starts to dominate some of this stuff, you can see, as I said, you've got this kind of race to sort of get it right. And if the right kind of people, if the right dApps can be really innovative right now, I think we're going to see real innovation and a real lurch forward. If we get in the struggle between the two, you're going to see all this fragmentalization, and it's going to be real rocky. But what I said, looking at that, is, pulling back to a 30,000 foot view, I said, why don't I do what I'm really good at, which is make amazing characters, tell great stories, do all the innovative stuff in terms of art and real creativity, put it out there on blockchain and have it positioned to plug and play as things leap forward in a way that I hope that they will. So that's where I've kind of positioned myself on it, is I can't really help. I've directed software development. I've directed teams of software developers working in games, but I don't really get in that code and innovate. So I said, I can sit back and kind of watch this space spin and, give my wise sage advice or whatever, or I can start creating what I can create right now and do my best to keep my eyes on all the moving parts and just make alignments and, and forge relationships and be positioned. And so that's really what I've been doing for almost a year now. And I want to give one quick anecdote, and then I might ask you to rephrase your question to make sure that I ultimately do answer it just right. But I was working on a MOBA title, 2012. What we had a proprietary engine. Now, the engine won all kinds of awards, right? And I'm going somewhere with this. I want to kind of paint this picture. My job was to create characters, build worlds, tell stories. And I believe I was doing that very, very well. And the community that was playing, the early alpha of the game and stuff really loved it. And the thing was, our engine was the best. People would come from other games that were similar to ours and say, you're doing it way better. I mean, almost every time, Eric, people would come and say, you guys are doing it right. You're really innovative. That game ultimately sort of flatlined and disappeared. And I had to move on to something else. And let me say this again, best engine, and with the awards to prove it, a seasoned, solid development team, and really great characterization and good characters, beautiful models. Like when people come into the game, they say, this is the best game in this class. And then they would leave and not come back.
And why wouldn't they come back?
Right. There's a question is why? Why don't they come back? Because it's a MOBA. You can't play it by yourself. You have to have a team. There must be at minimum 3 of you. Really, there must be 5 of you. And if you're going to think about doing it competitively or something, really getting it, you need more than 5 because you need alternates. And you know what I'm saying? We couldn't adopt one player at a time. We couldn't. And every time we tried to do it, they're like, I love this. See you never, right? They just vanished because it was on them to go back to other games where they were already entrenched with their players and they already had their best characters picked. It was on them to go and evangelize at minimum 2, probably 7 more people to come over. And then, you know what? Other groups had to do that at the same time, or they'd come over to play and there's no one in the queue to battle against. You understand what I'm saying? Our problem was not the technology. Our problem was not the characters. Our problem was not the community. Our problem was that we were not positioned to onboard. And that's honestly one of the biggest problems that I see happening in the crypto, DeFi, blockchain space right now, is we can really get a certain type of person and we can really get a certain type of player, but we're not going broad. We're going very, very deep. And so we get those early adopters, but we're going to have a ton of competition. Those people are going to start to be spread thin, right? What I want to do with Book of Alchemy, the way that I'm approaching it is, now this thing has to really have something for everyone. And people need to perhaps first experience it outside of the blockchain elements. They need a comic book. They need a streaming service, like an animated show. They need a lore book. They need a t-shirt. Let's show people that there's a ton of fun here so that when we do onboard them, the early adopters are here having a great time. And these people are in love with the IP, the intellectual property, and we create onboarding ramps where they don't have to struggle to get in, right? So I've been doing everything I'm doing from that perspective. I think, if I'm answering your question, that might be the real critical issue we have with the metaverse, right? And that's why I think Meta is the worst company in the world to try to solve this, because they can't solve it with their own base. They're hedging people like nothing because people are like, that space isn't for me. I got my first Facebook account. Good golly, it was 12 or 13 or 15 years ago or something. And now people, because I'm in my late 40s, I'm kind of their audience, right? Is these people that are sort of in the 40s, 50s, and even 60s, I think, that came in through, it was a Farmville or whatever, where they started playing these games. They are not keeping the youth. So if you look at their Meta commercials, it's all these, hip, swarthy 20-year-olds in bikinis sitting around in digital jungles, drinking a Coca-Cola with a tiger. You can make that commercial, but you are not going to get those people being Facebook. You know what I'm saying? You're not doing any of the stuff that's required. So I hope I'm answering your question, in that I think the technology is emerging, but what we've got to do is we've got to think of all kinds of gamers, and we've got to think of all kinds of people, and we need to build some world and some story and some real connective tissue that captivates these people to bring them, so that when they play the game, they're like, my character's real. My character feels real to me. My weapon is fun. I helped crafting, all those types of things.
I think you did, and you brought up an interesting point. So back to like a Moby. You said that you didn't think it was a community issue. You thought it was an ease of onboarding issue. I actually would argue, and for a purpose, not because I'm argumentative, I would argue that is a community issue. Because, and I think when you're explaining Facebook, or you're explaining what you're trying to do with Book of Alchemy. There's a couple of levels that I'm fascinated with your project. One of which is that you are endeavoring to build your own community around the assets or the characters and their story, which can be transported to different environments to the extent that they're making them available. And so what you're doing is you're trying to build not only a community, but a sustainable community. And if you can build a sustainable community around those assets or the characters, like I think assets, but I'm not trying to overly financialize them, but maybe I'll just stay with characters. If you can build that community, that storyline, that community around those, then that becomes something that becomes powerful to the different multi-hyperverses that are looking to bid for or looking to engage their community. In other words, I'm trying to build the metaverse, right? I'm going to use it for now until some influencer comes out and sets me straight. But they're trying to build a metaverse, and they're trying to build a community. And one way to build that community is to bring in characters and things from the outside, that portability, that will then come and use that experience. They can pull it from other games. Now, the only challenge that they have, intriguingly, if you think about sort of the grander scheme, is that once you get committed to this metaverse, there's also a retention element, because if I can bring it in, I can bring it out, I can choose to engage, which is the freedom of it, but it really kind of makes it much more competitive. You're not even just walled garden, which is what Facebook's trying to do. The walled garden approach, I'll own everything, you have to stay here, you can't get out. That encourages more innovation, but by the same token, it also makes you more susceptible to competitive forces. You can suddenly lose that community. So overall, I think it is the end users that benefit the most, because it'll force them to do better. It'll force them to be innovative. But to me, on some level, the characters, the accessories that are with them, there's going to be some real power to those as well. Like, everybody talks about the metaverse, but what you bring to the metaverse could be equally or even potentially more important, depending on what the selection is out there for different multiverses, et cetera. So that's one of the things that's sort of striking to me when I, talking to you about the paradigm that you're exploring.
Yeah. So it's just what you said. If we really want to embrace sort of DeFi and decentralization, there really is a lot of freedom for the owner, consumer, player. Traditionally, you look at Apple, look at Meta, look at Microsoft, the whole idea has been to get rid of all that nonsense and lock people in, so that everything now is a subscription service, right? You've got all this music in your library or whatever. You turn off that subscription service, you in essence lose it all. The idea with the metaverse is that doesn't happen, that you obtained it on block, it's yours, and you can interact with these other elements. So I think the beauty of that is, if, let's say, I make a character, a Book of Alchemy character, and you can take that character out of sort of my sandbox, you can take it out of the game or out of the environment that I'm building, and you can take him, let's say, and you can play somewhere else. And maybe what you do with him in that environment is really quite different, because I'm building these sort of battle characters, these warriors, but they do have stories and lands and homes and things. But largely my game is about a certain conflict that's coming up that has to be resolved, not necessarily with combat, but there will definitely be some combat, right? So, but you could take that character, if you were in love with him or her, and you could say, this thing feels really real to me. Let's play over here in this environment where I'm actually in like a poker match or something, with someone else. The person building that environment says, how do I get a return from this person that's come in and explored? I think the beauty of it is that person should be, or that character should be able to take something, if you will, back with him. And it should become part, like if we're talking about charged particles, that element should become stitched to the NFT. If that content is compelling, if then, let's say, you take my character called Daltanius, you take him out of my battle world and he goes and he plays poker and he wins and he gets some special, token. If he can then come out from both my space and the poker space, and with that token and that character have an advantage in yet another world because he's got the character and the token, now You have this beautiful environment like real life, right? Like a metaverse, where we're going into these different entities to obtain something of value that carries with it some exchangeability or some interoperability somewhere else. That's where I think the real innovation is, right? In that the thing that the person takes from your poker game also can't just live in your poker game. If we all build it in the sense that these things should have some intrinsic value and should be able to offer, advantages, swag, because even, just to be able to show up as that character, as an NFT in another world, if people could just sort of check Daltanius's pockets and see he got that token, even if he can't do anything with it, they say, man, where you get that? Well, you played some poker, here I go. And it becomes this beautiful marketing strategy. But we have to think of it that way from the outset. Right? It cannot just be, how do I get people in, lock them in, you only play here. We've got to move away from that. We're a big global society. We don't experience that in real life, right? We interact with who we want to interact with. We go online. It's by and large still mostly unregulated. I can go into a chat room or something. I can interact with all kinds of people. And we're used to that now, and we desire that. So the metaverse has got to build spaces and properties that embrace this idea. And the way that I've started to do it with Book of Alchemy was say, I just want the NFTs that I'm creating to feel real. Like I put every ounce of energy and mental, space into it that I could, that it lives in a world that sort of has organic rules to it, that there's a reason why these characters exist and why they live where they live, et cetera. Because if people come in and obtain that, they already feel like I've got an entity here that has some life to it. I enjoy using it in the Book of Alchemy. What could it be like if I sat down to play poker with Wyatt or something like that? That's a really compelling scenario. So that's kind of been my drive.
Yeah, and it sort of gets into the whole interoperability aspect of it. You have to think that if you don't have even if you have the ability to be fully interoperable between all multi-hyperverses, somebody's going to shoot me for the way that I'm doing this, but if you have it, that interoperability isn't necessarily going to result in your characters being recognized in a useful way across all metaverses. So what I would imagine would happen is you're going to have almost like treaties or recognition, right? Recognition arrangements between different verses, we'll call it. And if you don't have that recognition, like I take, what was the character?
Daltanius, yeah.
Daltanius. I should have done something I could remember better, right? So you take Daltanius and you bring him to a different metaverse, but within that construct, they don't recognize all the different attributes. They don't accord value to it. Like if he has X number of power or he has a particular implement, that may not translate into anything. So you'll have different potential versus competing for, we'll grant full recognition as an incentive for these people to come. And certainly the community that's behind these assets is going to drive that. Like if there's a large community behind particular assets, they will say, okay, we'll endeavor to recognize we'll read all the fields and understand the asset value and accord certain amount of power to it, and also allow you to sort of engage on our platform. So they have to sort of build this whole interoperability component with it. And that, there'll be a lot of, presumably, once that gets started, right? So there'll be the initial phase where everybody's doing everything. Once you start to, once there's a real advancement in the evolution, the 24 to 48 months that you're talking about, at that stage, there's going to be, the winners are going to start to be chosen, which doesn't mean that you can't have others up and coming, but there'll be a critical mass, and certain multiverses which have the user base or have all the different interoperability and the recognition. There'll be assets that have that community that they are ensuring that they're not interoperable to. And there may be even some that say, we don't recognize it from certain other multiverses because we don't trust how they're doing it. They super inflate. People go on these multiverses and they basically, fight a goldfish, and then they're like all powerful, and they come into our multiverse and, they expect to port it in. So you could have like this whole arbing. I know I got carried away with that example, but
So you're so right that it's tricky. And even the whole idea of interoperability brings, I think, certain dangers with it. because of that idea that certain premier spaces are going to start to lead the way with innovation. Once they sort of do that, will they still hold to these tenets of interoperability and decentralization, or will they begin to do what happens in many companies to say, we kind of do want to own this thing a little bit, and if you want to play in our sandbox, you've got to do certain things, etc. We'll see how all that shakes out. But the core thing for me, as I'm building these characters in this NFT world for this game, was to use the existing fundamental components of NFTs and blockchain as much as I could. Right. So because I've written almost no code for this world yet. Instead, I found charged particles, and I said, you're using fundamental blockchain technology, and it feels like games. Let me plug into that, because I believe this offers a pathway for interoperability, right? Where I'm using basic properties and meta tags to put in the elements that I want to be game-based for these characters, instead of adding on some richer, or if you will, some more like that proprietary engine that I talked about in the MOBA game that I was working in, right? Instead of that, taking what's already out there, what's super salient about the blockchain, and saying, let me make really good creative and let me plug it into what exists now, and hold fast to that, because I believe that offers the best way for this character to one day easily and seamlessly go play in other environments, right, that are built on the same blockchain technology. I have a really nice NFT, 2 of them, in my collection. That is, I didn't make this one. This is one that I obtained through different community relationships. And you can 3D rotate it. The top flips up. It's got all these gears. It's really quite great. And it actually evolves over time. If you do certain things in their DeFi space, new elements come in. They've worked on it for a full year. Which is great, before they launched it. But when they launched it, you can't view it in OpenSea. This really beautiful, magnificent thing that's in my wallet. If you go on OpenSea, I can see that it's there, but it's just sort of like this little placeholder, like link broken type of image, right? None of that. You have to go to their actual website to do all the fun things with this NFT. It's that sort of centralized scenario that you've got this marketplace run by just a few people who don't necessarily embrace DeFi, but they're playing in this broader community, and they're not positioned for growth, or they just don't want to grow, the way they should grow. Those are the troubling things, right? And you've said it beautifully. But I think the answer to that is for those of us that are building, to say we're going to emerge with the technology. I'm not going to get out in front of this thing. I can make a game right now with the technology that exists and with the intellectual property that I've created that's really compelling, and it can be poised to move because I'm staying core to what the block already offers. Right. And I'm adding onto it all this creative energy. That's where I've tried to position myself, so that it will be the easiest method possible to say, hey, look, everything you need is actually in the block and in the properties and the metadata. You should be able to just plug this in if you want to play, with these entities. And hopefully you don't come up against a lot of these OpenSeas and stuff that, that are just too busy to do it. Hopefully we're going to interact with actual dApps and actual development groups and, agile developers. They're like, yeah, I too want to embrace the existing technology and be positioned for it to move forward. So I think we do have a path forward, is what I'm saying. But we have to start as consumers in the DeFi and in the blockchain space to start to penalize these people that are already getting it wrong, that already hold big sway, and say, you're doing this wrong. I've got to go somewhere else. And that's going to be hard, but it's on us at this time to start to immediately break apart these juggernauts that are already emerging and say, no, that doesn't play well with others. That's not the metaverse we've been promised. We're going to do something different.
Right. And I think that's one of the critiques of now throwing another $200 word in there, or whatever inflationary number you use. How many the Web3, right? So the promise of this Web3, the portability, decentralized servers, being able to port assets. I mean, in many ways, Metaverse and Web3 are intertwined, right? But yeah, I mean, there is a risk of the Web3 promise being perverted. And so let's talk a little bit in the remaining time we have about, we talked a little bit about the Book of Alchemy, how it differentiates itself. But tell us a little bit about the project. I know when we were talking pre-call, you told me about the Forge, and I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. So, let's hear it.
Yeah, so Book of Alchemy is, as I say, started as an NFT drop. I immediately knew that I wanted to make a game out of it. It started as 40 NFTs, and they're very they're very character based right from the start, right? All these NFTs have beings, entities, warriors, even, barmaids, whatever on them as I'm trying to build out this world. And the first drop did really, really well. And I then began to say, what else does the community want? Immediately, the community said, we want profile pictures, right? We want hand-drawn custom characters. So I began to do that. So you have the Book of Alchemy drop out there. There's 40 NFTs. You also have the Olympic League of Crucible Holders, which is ALCH, ALC as an acronym, Alchemy, right? So I've got, I think, about 27 of those characters that are now out there. And most of them are owned. People have obtained them because they know the game is coming. And then I began to craft weapons on layer 2 Polygon on charged particles, where you could go out and you could get these, if you will, these elemental, inexpensive NFTs, like a little wedge of gold, a little wedge of silver, a little wedge of brass, and you also could get yourself a rune. And if you nested those things together just right, and I did all these tutorials and things on the Discord so people could understand. I didn't want it to be complicated, but I did want it to feel a bit like a game. If you went out and you got your rune and you got your 3 metals and you nested your 3 metals in your rune, you could take that kit, what I call a weapons kit, and you could then nest it on charged particles into a forge. And then I would make your weapon. Once you had your rune and your 3 metals nested in your rune, you take the rune with the 3 metals, you put them in the forge. Now you've got a weapon that's ready to be made, right? And I kept this low gas fees on Polygon layer 2 because I didn't want people to have to pay gas for 4 NFTs and then go pay gas for this weapon, right? We're doing the crafting on layer 2. I was minting the weapons on layer 1 ETH main, where people really feel, a lot of the value and the prestige is. So I didn't want them to have to pay gas over and over and over. But what happened with the forges, to speak specifically to it, so to back up real quick, I've got this beautiful community that's come around. I've announced we're going to make a game. I'm making NFTs that look game-like, that have world building. When I do the description of the NFTs, it tells several paragraphs of the backstory of this character, what clan they're from, all these types of things. I also put a lot of that stuff in the properties and the metadata. And I'm also building a lore book that looks at the whole picture, that takes some of those profile picture art and some of the forge art and some of the character art that I've done, puts it in a 2-page spread and says, this clan lives here. Their style of alchemy is like this. They come from this house way back. They're really good at weapon forging, or whatever it may be, because I really want people to feel like if they want to know about this world, they can go on and know about it. But one thing that I chose to do when I began to build the weapon crafting system is I said, how can I do something that gives back? If people want to sort of buy in, if people want to have ownership before the game even starts to be developed, if they want to know they've got a real vested stake in this world, what could I do? And I was thinking about weapon crafting. And I said, well, once they've made their kit, once they've got their rune and their metals, let's make a forge, an NFT, because I've got 7 or 8 clans of alchemists. I've got these houses, if you will, sort of like a Game of Thrones type thing, right? You can be from